access the webinar recording. It's also be available on our YouTube. So now, Christopher, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Chisom. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you will gain a lot from this and you'll be able to help your organization to become compliant and to save your organization a lot of money in terms of fines that GDPR enforces. This is the agenda for today. We'll go through what GDPR means. We'll also look at how it affects Nigeria and what Nigeria is doing to become GDPR compliant, so to speak. And we'll also look at how companies lose data and the risk-based approach to GDPR that companies usually undertake. Most of them often are reactive, often trying to sort out the situation after it's escalated. And we'll look at recommendations for various solutions that can help your organization to meet GDPR compliance. And also we'll share resources to you where you can read more and learn more about GDPR, and then we'll take your question and answers, and Ha-Shem will be able to help you going forward with POCs, presentations, and other materials that could help you defend the GDPR to your management. Quickly, we look at data. Data is now the new oil, it's now the new gold, it's now the most valuable asset that a company has. It could be company data, it could be customer data, it could be competitive intelligence data. So all kinds of data now have more value to the hackers than it used to be. Before, the hackers would infect your organization with virus, and then your systems will go down, and you'll have to maybe rebuild. There will be downtime, which will cost you a lot of money. But these days, they're not just trying to use ransomware anymore. They're now trying to steal data, to blackmail you with data, and then also to even sell those data to the dark web or third-party marketing companies or political organizations who will make use of that. So data is now the most important asset that any organization has. That's why data protection is top priority for those customers. If you have noticed in the last couple of months, you will notice that whenever you visit the website, there's a pop-up that asks you to accept cookies. It asks you to accept the terms and conditions. It's become more rampant since May this year, and this is primarily due to GDPR enforcement. Most of the websites that we visit are actually based out in the United States, but even the United States is trying to become compliant with the GDPR. So why are we concerned about cookies? Cookies collect a lot of information about you. For those who don't know, when you visit the website and it installs cookies on your system, so you don't have to log in all the time. For example, if you sign in on the homepage and you're visiting other parts of the website, if you didn't have a cookie, it will ask you to sign in every single web page that you visit. But because you have cookies, they help to retain some information about you. And the GDPR, the EU sees this kind of information as something that's peculiar to a particular customer that can be used to identify a customer. That includes your IP address, your location, and all of that. This is too much information to not request the consent of the owner before you put this kind of cookie or code on their systems. So it's become more rampant now that organizations are asking for consent. Now, what's the operating costs of not securing your data in Nigeria? From the Ministry of Communications in Nigeria, it's been found out that Nigeria has lost about 0.08 of its GDP to cybercrimes, and about 75% of those cybercrimes were successful in 2017. So in 2016, we lost about $450 million to cyber attacks, and in 2017, it's grown to $500 million. So we can see there's growth in this sector, and it's not looking like it will decline anytime soon. So what are we doing to protect customer data? What are we doing to protect our employees? What are we doing to protect ourselves from falling victim to both cyber attacks? Because now this is like a double punishment. First of all, you fall victim to a cyber attack, the EU GDPR punishes you, and the next thing, you also having to face hackers who are milking you, blackmailing your organization and taking money out of you. So it's better for us to kill two birds with a stone, rather. So GDPR in a nutshell, GDPR means General Data Protection Regulation. It's not a compliance standard, so to speak. It's more like an advice. It's more like how do I put it now? It's more like a process that helps to ensure that you have put all the right things in place in the event of a breach. It was adopted in 2016, and the EU gave everyone at least 2 years upstart so that you can fine-tune your processes to meet up with GDPR requirements. So it came into force on 5th of May this year, and it applies to all public and private organizations operating in the EU or out of the EU. Any organization at all that processes or stores data that belongs to EU residents and data subjects. We'll discuss more about the data subject. When we talk about EU residents, it doesn't mean that a website in Nigeria cannot be punished if there's a breach that involves data of an EU resident. Take, for example, a Nigerian who moved abroad, or a Nigerian with dual citizenship, for example. You can't really tell from the name or from the location whether this person is an EU resident or not. So the EU GDPR policy cuts across all countries, all continents. So there's no one that's exempt from this, so to speak. So what organizations are doing is to try as much as possible to meet up with the GDPR requirements, and then the government of several countries are also trying their best to ensure that they protect their own citizens from, so that they can comply with the GDPR regulations and meet the requirements and not have to pay those safety fines. As you can see here, the fines for non-compliance and breach is up to about 40% of the annual revenue, or 20 million euros, whichever is more. So for an organization like Facebook, they would probably have to pay billions of dollars in non-compliance fines, while an organization in Nigeria will be compelled to pay up to 20 million euros, which is a whole lot of money. And also, you may have seen a host of companies donning these badges on their websites, on some of their products, saying they're GDPR ready. The reason everyone is scrambling to be GDPR ready is because they don't want to pay those fines, those hefty fines. Now, the three most important people in the GDPR regulations are the data subjects. That's the person who the data is about. That's the customer, whose data you collect, whose health information you collect, date of birth, name, IP address, location, preferences, gender, biometrics, and all of that. That's the data subject. The data controller is the person who makes decisions with the data. This is usually the boss, the CEO, or the decision makers, while the data processor is the one who actually handles the data under the instruction of the boss. This could be the developer, the backend programmer, the database administrator. So these are the three major players in the GDPR regulation. So GDPR has redefined what personal data means. Personal data used to mean your name, your date of birth, your bio data, so to speak. But right now, personal data could mean cookies, your IP address, your health information, your genetics, even your preference, of a particular color. It's termed to be a personal data, and GDPR enforces how this data is collected, processed, kept, and destroyed. So there are several requirements regarding accountability, data breaches, which must be reported within 3 days. If you don't report within 3 days, you may be fined 4% of the annual revenue. Also talks about data transfer, how you store data, how you transfer data, how you retrieve data. All of these are all documented in GDPR guidelines. So the question now is, would GDPR apply to me? It depends on where you are. You're based in Nigeria. If you are servicing lots of customers, and some of the customers include expatriates, hotels, organizations who deal with expatriates, or you are in 1 or 2 countries, there's a high likelihood that GDPR will apply to you, and you are actually at risk of breaching GDPR rules if you don't have the regulations, the compliance regulations in place. So why should Nigerian businesses care about GDPR? It's extraterritorial effect. We all know the EU is really vast in their coverage. They have trade agreements with almost all of the countries in West Africa, for example, especially Nigeria. And if you're a multinational, you are already probably GDPR ready. You can check that with your legal department or your IT department. If you're an European customer, you're definitely going to GDPR ready. And if you are probably ISO 27001 certified, PCI DSS certified, HIPAA certified, and you have all those data protection certification, you probably already met about 95% of GDPR requirements. You just need to be sure that you have met it 100%. So you will have to comply with the GDPR if you store personal data on EU individuals, residents, or subjects, or even visitors. For example, if someone leaves this country and goes to the EU to study for about 4 years, they are counted as an EU resident, and whatever data you had on them, even before they left the country, must be subject to GDPR regulations. So if you monitor the behavior of such people, or you offer goods or services to them, I would say if you have a website, for any reason, your website doesn't block access to people from the EU, you serve everyone in the world, then you must take the GDPR regulations seriously. So if you service people in Europe, for example, or you accept currency online, you have PayPal, you have MasterCard, you need to really take the EU GDPR seriously. So we've started seeing a lot of people trying to put out disclaimers, trying to put out warning signs that we may ask for your name and all of that. If you're not comfortable giving this, please do not agree, or please decline this. So that is why you see those messages when you visit those websites. There's some websites, if you don't click I agree, they will not even allow you to visit their website. So why is Nigeria as a country concerned about the GDPR? There are several reasons. One of the reasons is that the IT security practices here are still not at par with what operates other countries. So we have email leaks, we have data breaches, the Cambridge Analytica issue that happened with UK and the US, where a lot of accounts were hacked from Facebook and other sources and used to process election malpractice, also affected Nigeria. We understand that Cambridge Analytica also took some of this data from Facebook to help the former president Goodluck Jonathan, which is actually a breach because they're trying to get user data and using them in ways that they should not. So data breaches are quite common in Nigeria. It's only that most of them actually go unreported. And any Nigerian company that does not wish to comply with this GDPR will actually need to delete all EU personal data from their records. You will have to actually find out if there's any of your customer that actually has ties to the EU or lives in the EU or has relocated to the EU to remove their data for you to become compliant. Or you can, do a blanket compliance check and make sure that you're compliant, whether you serve only Nigerian customers or you may inadvertently, service EU citizens or residents as well. So Nigeria is already, waking up to GDPR, and Nigeria is also doing some things about GDPR. So there has been a lot of pressure on the National Assembly to enact data protection laws. We actually have data protection laws, but they are quite weak, and they are not currently enforced. So we've been seeing NCC, ITU, NITDA, all of them coming up to change our regulations to fit EU's new data protection law. South Africa came up with the POPI law, which is very similar to GDPR. Kenya is doing the same, Brazil has done theirs, China is doing theirs as well. So everyone is basically scrambling to, because GDPR is for the EU, they are creating similar laws to protect their own citizens, because if their citizens who own organizations commit a breach of GDPR regulations, they will be fined even though they're outside the borders of the EU. That's why organizations have to be protected by their own government by new data protection laws. So like we've seen, the legislators worldwide are trying to meet up with legislation to bend to Europe's privacy rules so that they can protect you from paying those huge fines. So for Nigeria as well, the NITDA finished up a draft around November last year, The draft is actually a version of the GDPR trying to specify what organizations in Nigeria need to do to protect data, to accept the consent of customers, to specify how long they're going to keep data, how they want to process the data, how they want to store it, and when they want to delete or how they do that. So all of these have been specified by the NITDA in 2017. So if you don't have this document, we can share it with you as one of the materials so that you can go back and read it. So we actually have data protection guidelines in Nigeria as well, but they have not been drafted. They have not been, as a particular law, which the National Assembly is currently working on. So now, how strong is the European Union, and why should we really be concerned about what affects only EU residents and data subjects? We've seen in the last couple of months how they've grilled the owner of Facebook. Already we know that the EU is the region which holds the International Criminal Court. They're also the ones who are in charge of Interpol, that's International Police. So the EU is a very strong global partner when it comes to enforcing laws, and you can be sure that they would enforce these GDPR laws to the maximum of their ability, and they will leverage on their relationship with governments to punish people who flout this law. So if you are here in Nigeria and there's a breach in your organization and it involves the data of an EU subject, you can be very sure that the EU will come hard upon you, and the Nigerian government will most likely back the EU to punish you. So that's why ignorance is not going to be an excuse for the law, and we need our IT teams, IT administrator, IT security teams to advise their organizations, to advise their legal team if they are doing business that might involve data of EU subjects, to immediately look at the EU GDPR compliance regulations and enforce them in their organizations to protect not only themselves and to also ensure that they don't have to pay those huge fines. Those huge fines could actually close down the business. People would have to be terminated because the organization would have to look for money to pay those huge fines. This is what we're trying to prevent as advisors to the organization. So GDPR is not just about data security. It's also about how you collect data, how you accept consent, how you request consent, your internal procedures regarding how you process data, how you report your compliance, how you do backup and recovery, and also every data subject has the right to be forgotten. So if someone comes to you and says, okay, you have my data since 2016, I don't want it on your system anymore, I want you to delete my data, I don't want it on your website anymore, that person has the right to ensure that you remove their data permanently without keeping it in any shape or form, without selling their data to third parties without their consent. So these are the things that GDPR is going to enforce. And it provides benefits both to individuals and organizations. It gives a competitive advantage because if you enforce GDPR properly, you will not have to worry about one of your disgruntled employees stealing your data, stealing your competitive information, and selling them or giving them to your competitors. So it's good for an organization to implement GDPR policies. So we have controls, policies, and actions around data governance. That's what personal data do you have, where is it stored, why are you keeping it, do you really need it, for how much longer do you need to keep this data. It also specifies how you can stop the causes of data loss, how to reduce the breach as much as possible. We already know that no matter how much you spend on IT security, there's only a guarantee of 99.9%. So the 0.1% means there is a huge chance that there could be a breach. And that breach is something that could be really, really terrible. And that 0.1% chance is what GDPR is saying you need to show documentation that you have done your best, your possible best, and the breach was not your fault. And even if the breach happened, you need to show how you have put those policies in place at the time of that breach to prevent data loss. So there could be data theft, but there would not be complete data loss if you have done what is required of you. And that will also help to reduce human error as much as possible. For example, you have people who send an email mistakenly to an external person or to the wrong recipients, thereby exposing confidential data. So the GDPR also addresses this. What are you doing as an organization to reduce human error? Now, the most important takeaway from the GDPR seminar is that you need to define and document what you consider to be the state of the art and be prepared to defend it. So this document is not a standard document. It doesn't specify which solutions to use to stop data loss or to reduce human error or to stop threats or hacking attempts into your organization. It only specifies you to write how you intend to meet the various suggestions that GDPR has laid out in that document. So you can say, for example, to reduce human error, we are using file encryption. To reduce the threats to physical theft of data from mobile devices like laptops and mobile phones, we are enforcing device encryption. So all of these things have to be laid out, because if there is a breach, the GDPR will ask for this document. They will look at this document and they will check. You need to be able to prove also that those policies were enforced at the time of that breach. Because if they look through the document, GDPR will judge you based on this document only. If you look through this document and it's below par, or you haven't done what you have specified in your state of the art, then you will have to pay those huge fines, which could mean a lot of things. You could lose, if you're quoted on the stock exchange, your share stock could really plummet. And in some cases, we have seen organizations having to close down just because of a data breach, let alone huge fines from the GDPR. So quickly, let's look at how organizations lose data in 2017. This is a report from a third party. About 60% of the time, data losses from hacking or malware. And as we were able to see from the Nigerian Communications Ministry, that about 75% of hacking attempts of cybersecurity attacks in Nigeria were successful. And that's huge. So about 60% of data loss comes from hacking or malware, which you can be able to augment or mitigate with your antivirus, next generation protection, firewall, and the rest of that. About 30%, which is about a third, comes from unintended disclosure. And this is huge. That's people who make mistakes, who inadvertently send information that they should not. This is mostly due to human error. And about 10%, as a result of physical loss, people who lose their phones, they lost their laptops, and others include portable devices and few other mistakes that people make to lose data. And this on its own could cause a whole lot of financial issues for an organization, especially when it comes to hacking or malware and unintended disclosure. Unintended disclosure is actually not very good for those who are in a highly competitive environment. When you come up with your proprietary information, proprietary intelligence, proprietary research outcomes, you want to keep them to yourself. You want to use them to develop your business. You don't want someone taking those competitive files that you have to your competitor, which they will now use against you. So there are several ways that GDPR can also help us as organizations, not only to become compliant, but also to protect ourselves and our users. So how far do you go to manage the risk to your data and IT assets? We have risk mitigation, which shows all the way what can be done. There are common ways to lose data, like hacking, malware, or malicious code. We have advanced malware, like the likes of Loki, Samsung that we've really seen, ransomware, which is also advanced malware based on exploits. We have unauthorized access and credential theft. When hackers take control of your network, they can now begin to steal passwords. They steal an admin password. They can now spread to your servers, your DNS servers, your file servers, your database servers, and steal those files. Then for lost or stolen laptop and storage devices also, they're one of the main causes of portable devices and physical loss. Finally, we have unintended disclosure, usually by email or lost through cloud storage. Cloud storage, for example, these days you have access to OneDrive, to Dropbox. Anyone who has your password basically has access to this the storage devices or storage locations in the cloud. So if someone hacks into your computer, for example, you already have your password on your web browser, you type dropbox.com, your password is already there, just click sign in, and they have access to all of this. And it's going to be easy for people, once they hack your system, to have access to all of your storage. So GDPR is trying their best to ensure that you have this also covered. So how can we help you to meet GDPR requirements? Like I said, there's no one size fits all. There's no single organization that can help any organization to meet all of the requirements of the GDPR. Like I said, there are several layers to this. We're talking about data collection, data retention, data processing, data storage, data retrieval, deletion, and all of that. So there are several solutions that are involved, but there are some parts that Sophos can help with. I think most of the part that involves hacking and malware, we can help with the XG firewall, the endpoint protection, the next generation endpoint protection that includes signatureless detection and EDR. Server protection can help you as much as possible to stop hacking and malware. And all of this will be documented in your state-of-the-art document that you will present to the GDPR or to any customer who would like to see your state-of-the-art before they do business with you. We can also help you to secure devices even if they are lost or stolen. So for physical devices, we use what we call full disk encryption. Also for mobile phones, for Android, iOS, we ensure that they are all encrypted. In the case of the theft, the hacker or the criminal will not be able to have access to those corporate data on those devices. And even if they do have access to them, we can remotely wipe the contents of those devices to ensure that the hacker does not steal confidential material. To reduce the impact of human error, we use a combination of endpoint protection, which includes DLP. DLP can help to stop users from copying some kind of file out of the network, like your customer information, financial accounts, and all of that. Those can be prevented from going out of the network. We can also use encryption to ensure that even if hackers are able to get onto your network, they're able to steal your files, whatever they steal from the network will be useless to them because those files will be encrypted and the hackers will not be able to decrypt those files and will not be able to use them against you. And finally, we have what we call phish threat. Phish threat it's more like an end user security awareness training tool. We can use the phish threat to simulate attacks on the network where users get an email, maybe asking them to link up on, connect to LinkedIn. Maybe there's a headhunter or a recruiting agency trying to give them a multi-million-dollar job. They click on this link, then it shows them a message that says, this could have been, a breach. So you have to take this training that teaches you about phishing attack, credential harvesting, and the likes, GDPR compliance as well. So this helps to prepare your users to reduce the impact of human error, just like you do your fire drills in HSE compliant organization. The fire drill is important to help reinforce what users need to do in the event of a fire outbreak. The same thing is what phish threat can help you achieve to prepare your users' mind so they can identify phishing attacks, they can identify credential harvesting attacks, they can identify ransomware payload attacks on their own. So all of this put together can help as much as possible to reduce the impact of human error. But the takeaway from this is that the single most important solution for GDPR is encryption. If you have encryption in place, full encryption, full disk encryption, there is no way in the world that you will have to pay a GDPR fine. If you can show that all of the files, all of the assets in your organization were encrypted at the time of the data breach. If GDPR can verify that, then you will not be able to pay a fine because it will be almost impossible for the hackers to be able to see the information that you had on those files since they're encrypted. So the takeaway is that the most important tool for you to meet with GDPR compliance is the encryption. That's your last line of defense, even if there is a bit, like we said, everyone guarantees you 99.9%. It's the 0.01% that GDPR is really after, and encryption helps you as much as possible to block that. So we can manage all of these solutions that I talked about through our Sophos Central dashboard. Sophos is a UK company. Of course, UK is most likely going to leave the EU, but they will also still be subject to the GDPR. So Sophos Central has been built with GDPR in mind. It has reporting. It's a converged platform for all of the Sophos solutions. So for encryption, for mobile protection, for endpoint protection, for server protection, wireless protection, all of this are converged in one single console that does the reporting as well. So if, for example, you have the state-of-the-art documents saying this is how we do this is how we do that. From Sophos Central, you can pull the policy. You can show that this policy was applied at this particular time. Say, for example, now, one of your employees, goes out of the office, they lose a flash drive that contains customer information, an EU customer, for example, and it's been reported as a breach. The GDPR will ask for your state-of-the-art document. Then you need to show them from Sophos Central at the time of the loss. You pull out the device ID. It shows exactly what policy was applied to that device. So the GDPR can see that at the time of the theft, this device actually was encrypted. The files on this device were encrypted with this particular key that's also safe, that the hackers did not get hold of this key. So the Sophos Central can easily help to demonstrate that you're GDPR compliant. It also ties in, has an API that ties into your SIEM solution, like Splunk and the rest of that, for example. So it ties straight into your SIEM, which is also an important part of the GDPR for those for the large organization. So Sophos Central has been built from the ground up with GDPR in mind, and it helps you to prove compliance with GDPR. So if you look at all of the products, you would see how Sophos can also help you with endpoint protection, intercept X, server security, device encryption, Sophos Mobile, and also file encryption solution. So by using all of these, you can see that you can meet a lot of the requirements of GDPR protection and also reduce your risk and your exposure to risk from hackers coming into the network. So how do you prepare for the GDPR? You need to take ownership of the readiness. You need to set up a team within your organization that will be able to evaluate your risk exposure, talking about who are your customers, are you likely to service EU residents if you are a global company, or if you service people from all over the world, then you need to evaluate your risk exposure. Determine your investment level. How much do you wish to invest on solutions that help you to meet this compliance? Like I said, if you're already ISO certified or you have other certifications, you're most likely compliant up to 95%. You need to get executive buy-in, that you need to present to your executive that this is what we want to do, this is what we want to do it. These are the benefits that we will get from being compliant with the GDPR, and this is what it's going to do for our organization. As you can see, you can also have a GDPR-ready badge on your website, on your product, so people know that this organization takes data protection seriously. So it gives customers some kind of peace of mind or trust when they see you have a GDPR badge. Some customers have, within their due diligence, their due process, they will request to see your state of the art before they give you business. We're seeing this from customers who own hosting centers, who have data centers where people come to host their services. They're asking them to see their state of the art. So this is very important. So you need to invest in the state of the art best practices, and that way you can say you are fully prepared to an extent for the GDPR. So in summary, GDPR has been around now for about 4 months. It's good practice. It's not just a lead weight. It's not a law that you must follow, but it will bite you hard if there's a breach because of your negligence. So it's the preparations are useful for most compliance laws. Like I said, if you have all the ISO, PCI DSS, you may already be compliant, and it can provide competitive advantage to you by protecting your data from fraudulent employees, disgruntled employees, and from your competition as well. So you can learn more and become more aware of GDPR. You can develop a plan internally and document it. You can also reduce the ways that you can lose data by reducing hacking and malware exposure, by reducing mistakes made by human beings, that's human error, and also by ensuring that all files are encrypted in your organization. So there are several links that Ha-Shem will also share with you, where you can learn more about the GDPR and also how to protect your data, how to be compliant, how to also present this to your superiors to justify your investment in GDPR. So if you already have a firewall solution, you have an endpoint solution, you have a SIEM solution, you have a lot of parts that fit into the GDPR framework, so to speak. So you may need to just review your policies, look at how to train users to minimize human error as much as possible, and how to encrypt your files before they go out so that they don't fall into the wrong hands. So that's been all for GDPR for Nigeria, the readiness. So you need to evaluate your readiness to meet up with GDPR. Like I said, ignorance is not an excuse. You can also see that Nigerian government is actively trying to comply with the GDPR. There's already a framework from NITDA that I've also shown you that I can share with you. So it's now up to you as the technology recommender in your organization to take this up to management and insist that you also need to start becoming compliant with the GDPR by starting your state-of-the-art document and ensuring that you document your protection policies in that document so that if there's a breach, which we cannot prevent 100%, you'll be able to bring out this document. This is what we have been doing as an organization to, as much as possible, prevent or reduce our risk to attacks or data breach. So at this point, we will take your questions.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, we'll be taking questions now. Okay, so if you have any questions, kindly type them in the IM window because we'll be ending shortly. Hello, any questions? Okay, so we have a question from Abraham. It says, interesting. Any cost implications? Christopher, over to you.
Okay, security always has a cost implication. It's usually like the chicken and egg discussion. Which one comes first? I think prevention is better than cure. As you can see, it doesn't cost so much for us to put the security practices in place, but it's going to cost a lot in the case of a data breach. I'll give you an example. We have a particular customer who's had to pay almost $2 million to hackers in the last year alone, to people who stole. There was a ransomware attack, and in the course of that ransomware attack, the hackers actually stole corporate data, and they've been blackmailing the organization, saying they will release this data to the dark web or to the public at any time. So they keep on paying these hackers this money, just to keep those files out of the public view. So the cost of not doing anything is going to even be worse. So yes, there will be a cost for you to meet up with the requirement, just like there's a cost for your firewall, there's a cost for your endpoints, which you renew every year. So there is a cost for security, as the GDPR regulations have in the document, and there will always be a cost for the likes of encryption, for security awareness training and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's preventing breaches. It's also preventing you from paying a hefty fine, 20 million euros, if there's a breach from the GDPR, or 4% of annual revenue. So the protection will justify the cost. So you can see GDPR compliance as an investment from your side as well.
So we have another question from Obafemi. It says, what important technologies are required for setup?
Okay, Obafemi, I believe that you may already have met most of the requirements for the GDPR. Like I said, if you already have a firewall, you already have an endpoint protection or antivirus, or you have a SIEM solution, or you have an encryption solution. So you probably have already met most of those guidelines. You just need to put them in the state of the art as a process. What you usually do to protect customer data that is stored with you in general. So you will need a couple of solutions which we will share with you in the GDPR regulations. You can go through them depending on your kind of business. There might be some need to invest in database protection, breach detection, user awareness training. So you look at those areas that have not been covered by your organization, and you document how you want to approach them and what you want to use, which tools you are going to use to meet up with the requirements. So yes, we can share that information with you. But at a minimum, you would have what every organization should have: a firewall, an endpoint solution, a comprehensive endpoint solution that can give you reporting, that can do a root cause analysis to show exactly how malware enters your network, or how hackers entered your network, what they did, what they took out of the network, and what you have done to protect users internally from those kind of attacks.
Okay, our next question. Our next question is from Francis. It says, will you also provide trainings for the organization's technical staff before implementation?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. For the solutions that we provide as part of the components that helps you meet the GDPR requirements, yes, we will provide training for those. We'll provide training for certification. There are trainings locally in Nigeria. We have webinars such as this. We also have trainings outside of the country, depending on which is convenient for you. But of course, yes, there are trainings to help you manage the infrastructure and to help you do your reporting as well. So that will be provided.
Okay. Any other questions before we end this session? Okay, I see someone is typing. Let's hold on. Okay, our next question is from Adeyemi. It says, is it only Sophos that one can use, or is there any other?
Thanks, Adeyemi. Sophos is not the only solution that helps you meet up with the GDPR requirements. Like I said, it's a host of recommendations from the GDPR, and there's not a single company in the world. I don't even think that 3 or 4 companies can help you meet all of the security suggestions in GDPR. So Sophos alone cannot do it. But for the products that Sophos has, that I've shown you, for example, the endpoint protection, the firewall, the encryption, they've been built, from the ground up, specifically with GDPR in mind, to help you meet compliance and to help you report compliance as stipulated in your state-of-the-art document. So Sophos can help you for those particular ones. But like I said, we still have stuff around data protection for databases, how you store and retrieve data, how you delete data. So these are other components that other organizations might be able to help with. So Sophos is not a one-stop shop for GDPR. There are several other solutions out there also that can help you. But by the time you look at the GDPR regulations, the full document in its entirety, you'll be able to see which other solutions out there that you can use to help you as much as possible meet up with the the compliance. But like we said, it's more about documenting what you want to use. The GDPR does not say you go out and buy a particular product. You only specify what you need to do to be able to meet up with a requirement to protect X, Y, and Z.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. I don't know if you have any other questions before we end this session. Our time is fast spent. Yes, IDM, it will also be made available on our YouTube. I'll impute the link now. Okay, we'll be ending now. Thank you all for joining this session. I did a very good job at taking us through GDPR general, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot. We appreciate your attendance. We apologize for the delay earlier, and we hope to see you during our next webinar. The recording will be made available on our Yammer pages and YouTube as well. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I'll impute the links shortly. We look forward to seeing you during our next webinar session. Thank you all, and do have a lovely day. Thank you. Sorry, yes, before I go, I forgot to mention, we'll be having a quiz for this webinar, on this webinar topic actually. So we'll send out the quiz to you next week. So you get to win a gift and stand a chance to be our Scholar of the Month, also Scholar of the Year. So please look out for our quiz. Send you the email next week. Thank you all.